Only 6 days after the British fleet arrived in 1788, La Pérouse's French expedition laid anchor in Botany Bay. The Franciscan chaplain and naturalist Claude Francois Receveur was dying from injuries sustained in Samoa. The chaplain of the other French vessel, the Abbé Jean-André Monget, performed the obsequies. In subsequent years, chaplains of passing French, Portuguese or Spanish ships sometimes celebrated Mass for the Catholic convicts, Marines and settlers, though there was no Catholic church or altar. Following the 1798 Irish Rebellion, 3 priests arrived as political prisoners, and there were some secret masses. In 1803, Governor King brought this out into the open by licensing Father James Dixon to offer Mass in Sydney, Parramatta and Windsor. But when the Irish rebelled again, Mass was driven underground, and eventually the last convict priest returned to Ireland. In 1817, Father Jeremiah O'Flynn arrived, undertook a brief ministry amongst the now 8,000 Catholic faithful, and was quickly deported. Thus, for the first 32 years of settlement, the Catholic faithful had to struggle on, mostly without priest or Mass, praying the Rosary and teaching catechism to their children. But they were hungry for spiritual leadership, preaching and sacraments, and repeatedly petitioned Church and Crown to send an official chaplain. On this day, 200 years ago, that aspiration was at last fulfilled. Fathers John Joseph Terry and Philip Connolly arrived from Cork on the Janus. From then onwards, Catholic priests, masses and churches were a regular part of Australian life. Connolly was a man of no small ability and attainments, witty and full of dry humour, of exemplary religious and moral habits, according to reports at the time. After a year's duty here in Sydney, he moved to Hobart Town, where he laboured for 14 years amongst a wicked and perverse generation, making quarterly rounds on horseback to Launceston, Georgetown and other settlements. Father Terry proved to be a popular, energetic and restless, articulate and thorough, a very high-profile, rather flamboyant public figure, and a far-seeing pastor. He was always in debt, and usually in contest with the civic and ecclesiastical authorities. He described his 44-year-long ministry in Australia as one of incessant labour, very often accompanied by painful anxiety. Yet he it was obtained this Hyde Park site and built the first St Mary's and many other churches and schools elsewhere. He travelled unceasingly around this country, visiting prisons, hospitals and farms, providing sacraments, counselling and teaching. He was a special friend to convicts and Aborigines, Catholic or not. He could live on the smell of an oily rag and give his last penny to the poor. This hero of the Australian Catholic priesthood is buried in our crypt, and I'll use his chalice today. Some of you will know the 4th century statue of the Good Shepherd from the Domitilla catacombs, now in the Vatican Museum. A clean-shaven young shepherd carries a sheep on his shoulders. It's a deliberately ambiguous work, as were so many in the persecuted early church. If an official came demanding an explanation, you could say, "Oh, it's just a lovely pastoral scene." But Christians knew what it was about. They sang "The Lord's my shepherd," a psalm written by David, the shepherd boy made king. They knew Jesus' words in John, "I am the good shepherd." They retold his parable of a shepherd who spares no effort to save a lost sheep, and when he finds it, joyfully lays it on his shoulders. This is the Good Shepherd of the Church, carrying frightened lambs through the pack of this world's wolves. The way the young shepherd carries the sheep on his shoulders prefigures our images of heroic Anzacs carrying wounded mates. Carrying an injured soldier single-handedly is no easy task, any more than carrying a heavy, gangly, uncooperative lamb. But when a sheep is helpless, or a soldier, it's all you can do to move them. The Good Shepherd comes to the rescue, not just of an anxious church, but of all wounded humanity. So when Jesus articulates the task of priest-shepherds today, there's no romantic pastoral ideal in the background. Jesus' sheep are often lost, injured, or scattered. They must be gathered into one from disparate places. They must be protected against wolves and brigands who come only to steal and kill and destroy. They must be guided to safe and satisfying pasture. And they must be so befriended that they will hear and trust their shepherd's voice. This is the mission of pastors, whether in St. John's fast-growing 1st century church, or Domitilla's 3rd century persecuted church, or John Joseph Terry's 19th century colonial church, or today's and tomorrow's Australian church, your church. If the Eucharistic hunger of early Australia led to an outcry for priests and priestly service, our present Eucharistic hunger during the COVID-19 crisis may presage a similar outcry in the months and years to come. I pray it is so. After Connolly and Terry came, many priests from Ireland and England and eventually many lands, including Australia itself. With the religious, they established much of our nation's spiritual and social infrastructure. Building on that patrimony, the Catholic community now sponsors an enormous network of parishes, hospitals, aged care facilities, schools, universities, pastoral and welfare activities. What those priests started has grown into an enormous and complex expression of faith and love. There's no denying that some priests and bishops failed us, sometimes terribly. But on this bicentenary, we remember that most by far, like Connolly and Terry, have been selflessly devoted to their people. Over these 2 centuries, the Church in Australia has experienced natural disasters, sectarian controversies, the abuse crisis, and pandemics closing churches. Each time, our priests have demonstrated generosity, perseverance, and pastoral creativity. Each time, the Catholic people have signalled their love and need for priests after the heart of the Good Shepherd. But why all this shepherding, this gathering and guarding and guiding? Is it just to build an ecclesiastical empire, a bigger flock than the shepherd down the road? Or to enjoy bossing the sheep around with your shepherd's crook? Or to get rich by fleecing the sheep? No, recalls Jesus today. The task of the Good Shepherd is to be the antithesis of the self-serving exploiter or molester. That man is the brigand, the anti-shepherd, anti-Christ. Christ, the Good Shepherd, comes, and so too the good pastor comes to give, not take, and to give himself completely. He comes for this purpose only, that the faithful might have life, the good, better, best life in this world, but also life eternal, life to the full.